Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Pearson, and I'm joined by Cipriano Lucario today. We want to thank Maureen Madison and Jan Dunbar Cooper at SAMHSA for giving us the opportunity to work with tribes and to speak with you today. So good morning and good afternoon. And I'll go ahead and share my screen there, Mark. We are now entering the third module of the Tribal Action Plan Learning Series. As soon as I get my screen up. Okay, so we've gone through module 1 where we explored and gathered information. We went through module 2 where we were planning and preparing, and today we're talking about adjusting and acting and adjusting, starting to put it all into action. So we'll be covering a couple of things from different perspectives today with the leadership track and community track. With leadership, it feels that it's important that leaders mobilize the community by engaging in a gathering of Native Americans or gathering of Alaska Natives, adopting a collaborative mindset, establishing healthy partnerships, assembling a crisis response team, leading Tribal Action Plan awareness campaign, and launching goals and objectives. From the community's perspective, we hope that the community will support the TAP effort by engaging in a GONA or GOAN, adopting a collaborative mindset, supporting a crisis response team and healthy partnerships, promoting TAP awareness and involvement, taking an active role in implementation, and maintaining the TAP effort across changes of leadership that come with elections. So we're going to kind of take a deep dive into some of these topics, and I wanted to turn it over to my colleague Cipriano to see if he had anything for opening for you guys today.
Yes, I really appreciate this slide, the opportunity that we have in engaging tribes and not just thinking about tribal leadership or councils, but those community leaders. And in strategic planning, we know that we need each other more than we even realize. We know we need each other more than we even know. And tribal leaders with their schedules, and these guys or these people, I should say, are covering everything from fish hatcheries to garbage to housing to environment. Their calendars are spread very, very thin. And the opportunity of engaging a community leader can be a huge asset for mobilizing efforts around strategic planning, because a lot of times our community leaders, even our vulnerable ones, know the gaps in the system. They know the movers and shakers in the community. They might know those traditions and cultures. They know those protocols. And a lot of times the community members can get things moving easier than tribal leaders or those elected officials. And so I think it's vital that when we talk about the opportunity of engaging tribal nations in strategic planning, that we create seats at the table for anybody that can contribute. And so I just think that that is a huge tool. And Sarah, if you could go back to your tree, just the overview slide before we jump right into GONA. One more, the whole tree, because I love where you placed GONA and I love where you placed CRM. And in this slide here, Sarah created this Prezi slide, and every image is useful for conversation. And as you could see here, even where she placed CRM, the community readiness model, where we talked about understanding the frequency of the community. We talked about, engaging the community where they are at, and the importance of engaging community and understanding where they're at. And then the GONA. These two models are ways that we can engage, nourish, heal, support the whole TAP process. And if a GONA is done with a high level of fidelity to the curriculum itself was based on healing from historical trauma and to support community-based prevention. And so what we're observing as a TA center is that when tribes look at these two recipes and they have the opportunity of implementing these two recipes on an ongoing basis with a high level of fidelity, they are collecting a lot of local community-based data, prevention activities, possibly goals, visions, prioritization of prevention activities. And this is the nourishment that could feed the strategic plan. And so the GONA and the CRM, they're in the roots for a reason. And as we discuss this acting and adjusting phase, we're going to be highlighting the GONA model as a tool to engage the community in solution-focused conversations. Thank you, Sarah, for going back just a little bit.
Absolutely. And I wonder sometimes if TAP shouldn't, the P shouldn't stand for Tribal Action People, because action plan without people, it's just, you're not going to go anywhere, right?
Exactly.
So we're today we're not going to talk about anything you haven't already heard or don't already know as a professional, but we're going to kind of pull it all together so you can see how these pieces and components work together. And earlier we talked about the importance of gathering people, establishing a tribal coordinating committee and supportive committees to help that group, harvesting local data, looking at the nuts and bolts of a tribal action plan. Today, we're going to look at those finer points and get how to pull it all together to go into implementation. And we're going to start with the important point of GONA. As we keep beating into everyone's brains here, TAF requires many helping hands. And we'll keep saying that you can't not do it alone. We've seen groups of administrators try to do a TAP alone, and it always ends up not being a good thing. They have to come back and bring the community back into it after they kind of try to do it themselves. But going through the process of GONA enhances your community prevention efforts to just make it work and make it pull together. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Cipriano, kind of to go into the nuts and bolts of what a GONA is all about.
Definitely. And I think this is important. GONA actually is a curriculum that was developed by the Center of Substance Abuse and Prevention, CSAP, as it was formerly known, which was encompassed within the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration. This is actually a federal government developed curriculum. And this was developed in the early 90s. And it was developed out of an understanding that training and technical assistance was not effective for certain populations. And so CSAP, in their infinite wisdom, said, hey, we could do better, but we need to learn how. And so they developed 4 different academies, 4 different efforts to help them understand how to serve different populations. One was the Asian Pacific Islanders. The second was the Hispanic Chicano community. One was the African American community, and then the Native American community. And developed these 4 institutes, as they were called. And they implemented funding for 1 year for these 4 institutes to help them understand how to do better work within their targeted range or targeted populations. And the Native American individuals, and these are still powerhouse people that are still working in communities today. Some of them we have lost, like Harold Belmont, Cookie Rose, some of our other tribal leaders that have passed on. But some are still working. Dr. Clayton Small, Joanne Kaufman, Theda Newbreast, Barbara Aragon were part of this initial wave of tribal healers, leaders, champions, supports that came together to discuss how to work in Indian country. And it's right off the back, the title shows how different it is. 3 out of the 4 projects identified their curriculum as institutes. But the Native people said, hey, we're not an institute, and we don't come together for a curriculum, and we don't come together for a training, but we gather. And just the name alone, Gathering of Native Americans, really shows the different worldview that tribes had when thinking about mobilizing the community. Another thing that they knew was that if you've been to one tribe, you only been to one tribe. And so they wanted to understand, how do we create a curriculum that has a flow and a process yet is adaptable for the hundreds of tribes, for the thousands of tribes on Turtle Island to understand how they heal from historical trauma. For anybody on the call who might not know the impact of colonization, colonization evolved over the 500 years on Turtle Island. And the tribes on the East Coast have a much different perspective and working relationship with the federal government than tribes all the way in Alaska. And so the impact of colonization was different depending on how the tribes were impacted by the movement west, how the states became a state, and how those states honored those federal treaties. And by the time colonization got to Alaska, it was a well-oiled machine because the state of Alaska, I believe, was not a state until the 1960s. And so even when you look at California, which became a state in 1850 or 1849, what happened to our relatives and ancestors in California is far different than maybe Seneca or the upstate New York tribes or the Great Plains or even my tribe as a Navajo Nation in the Southwest. Very different understanding of how colonization impacted our people. So this curriculum that was developed, the GONA or the GOAN, as it's been adapted for our Alaska relatives, the Gathering of Alaska Natives, is what GOAN, the acronym stands for, is made up of 4 themes: belonging, mastery, interdependence, and generosity. And these 4 themes are woven into understanding what we knew as best practices in the early 90s, thinking about Tuckman's forming, norming, storming, and performing, and also understanding the cultural side of it, that every tribe has a fabric that helps their tribal citizens understand how we belong to each other. So belonging is really building identifying the strengths, how we are interconnected as a tribe, as a family, as a community. We acknowledge and understand what are those supportive, protective factors. We identify the container to have tough conversations. How do we talk about suicide? How do we talk about substance abuse? How do we talk about healing? How do we talk about hope? And what is needed in the room to make sure that we're taking care of each other? We provide opportunities to tell story. The GONA curriculum is really shaped off storytelling. And in Indian country, there's 3 types of stories that we generally use in the curriculum. Our traditional stories. These are creation stories that have been shared or that we have written down or we know. We have cultural stories, stories about trickster, stories about how fire was created. These cultural stories have a lot of teachings within them. Or personal stories of resiliency, personal stories of balance. And these 3 types of stories we ask community members. So let me take a step back. As a TA center implementing a GONA, we would work with a community to identify speakers, supports, storytellers, and champions that as a facilitator, we would help highlight because local knowledge is best. So as a GONA facilitator, we are not telling these stories, but we are assisting community members share these types of stories. Another thing that's important about the GONA as an overall model is that there's a difference between a facilitator, a presenter, and a trainer. In the GONA, we might do a little bit of presentation, we might do a little bit about training, but most importantly, we are facilitating the conversation in order to have support from the local community to dive deeper. But in belonging, the biggest thing is to establish a foundation of trust, to identify norms. What are those anchors that when we do storm, they're going to ground us, and provide a safe opportunity that is built on strengths and the fabrics that hold us together. Now, if you were coming from the outside and you came on the first day of GONA, you would see us having fun, you would see us laughing, you would see us doing teamwork. The meat and potatoes of the curriculum is having big group discussions. That big group is broken down into small bands, clans, families, groups, and those small groups have discussions about the identified topic And then there's a teach back. What was discussed at the table is brought back to the bigger circle as mini teaches or teach backs to start to develop, that collective understanding. So big group discussions, small group process, small group teach back in a safe way. And that's how, as a facilitator, we start to harvest information through these guided activities. If any questions do come up throughout this conversation, please feel free to use the chat box. Please feel free to raise your hand. Please stop us at any time to ask questions about what you heard. We are here to serve and support and provide a discussion about supporting Indian country. Sarah, next slide, please.
Sure, and each one of these sections takes about a day, isn't that right?
Yes, the to stay true to the fidelity of the curriculum, each theme would be dedicated a day. We are starting to see tribes think about overnight gonas and camp out gonas. I've heard and participated in gonas that went longer than 4 days. My colleagues and my mentors and teachers have shared with me tribes in the First Nations in Canada have did 15-day gonas, and that would be 3 days on belonging, 3 days on mastery, 3 days. And those days are surrounded with cultural activities, sweat lodge, healing at night. So really sky's the limit as far as how deep we want to go. What we are seeing and observing as a TA center, that if you shorten the 4-day curriculum to a 3-day or even 2-day, it really limits the amount of information that could be harvested and collected. And maybe the conversations stay a little bit more superficial and don't go as deep as you could see here in mastery to explore the historical traumas or the impact of colonization on our tribal relatives. In mastery, the second theme, is the day that we start to unpack what happened to us. Not what's wrong with you, but what happened to us as a tribe, what happened to us as a community, what happened to our ancestors, what happened to our relatives. Uh, this is where we start to bring in terminology like historical trauma. We start to have conversations of how those historical trauma experiences created unhealthy intergenerational patterns. And when those unhealthy intergenerational patterns got rooted within our families, they created the current realities that are impacting us today. And so that is really where we start to see how did our communities get like this, because we know our tribal nations didn't get like this overnight. So how do we start to learn what happened? We start to examine stories. We ask tribal members to tell stories of what has happened. We hear stories, for the tribes in California. We hear tribes of the gold rush and the gold greed and genocide, or the impact of the mission system. For tribes in Oklahoma, we hear stories of the Sooners and the land rush and the impact of the allotments. For the tribes in the Great Plains, this is where we start to see or hear or understand the impact of the wars of the Great Plains, the boarding schools. For our tribes in the Southwest, the impact of boarding schools and the churches. Or for our relatives in Alaska, the mineral development and the impact and the disenfranchisement for land. And so by engaging the tribe in hearing what happened to us and their story, we're starting to hear their history, their experiences, their lens of unhealthy patterns. And this is vital for strategic planning. This is vital for the team that is pulling together a tribal action plan, that you could focus your goals, activities, your healing efforts on things that are impacting the community and not just throwing darts to see what sticks. We also know the importance of not getting stuck on trauma. And this is where in mastery, we recognize the importance of our cultural practices. We recognize the importance of of traditional knowledge, and we start to recognize what is the healing process. At the end of mastery, this is a vital junction in the curriculum. There is a healing or letting go process that will be led by the community. In the curriculum, it talks about maybe a wiping of the tears ceremony, offering tobacco into a fire, putting a rock in the water, When you work with a tribe, we have to ask what, how can they lead an effort around letting go? Because if we spent the whole day kind of talking about trauma, but also weaving in resiliency, looking at our culture, understanding how do we heal from this, and then actually practicing that letting go process, this is where we open up the opportunity for day 3 to begin to develop that collective vision of where do we want to go, what's our hope, and how do we start to move forward in the third theme of interdependence. So there's a marker in between the two that a community-led healing effort would happen, because in day 3 there is no longer talking about what happened yesterday. Our focus is on the here and now, our focus on developing a collective vision, and our focus is on how do we start to dream about where we would like to go as a tribal nation. In this day, we might ask tribes to engage in group activities, answering questions like, if our tribal social services and our tribal nation had all of the resources to be well, what would our reservation look like? What would our services look like? How would it operate? What would our homes look like? What would the houses look like? What would be in the houses? And this is where we really engage our community members to dream that if they had all the tools and resources, what would they look like? And this is vital because as I translate this into kind of federalese, and that's one of the skill sets I think I picked up in DC, is taking community opportunity and translating into federalese. Those visions in this art project is really our long-term strategic plan. And so by engaging our community to draw these pictures, to think about, what would they really want their nation to look like? This is our hope for the future and our long-term vision and kind of our logic model moving forward. We talk about standards for the future. We talk about the importance of maintaining balance and necessary to solve problems. We start to asset map what's in the community, what can we start to build on, what are those things that are bringing people together, and how do we identify strategic directions to move forward. This whole day is dedicated to visioning, asset mapping, and developing ideas to help our relatives be well. Tara, did I miss anything? I know I covered a lot so far.
No, I think you're doing pretty well. I mean, this is a lot to take in, and these are the tools that our people here need to know before they really. It's a foundational information that they need to know to be ready and prepared to implement a tribal action plan. So this is good. We're easing our way through this presentation. We're taking our time. And
Yes.
did you want to pause for any questions or comments people might have? Do you see?
Yes. If anybody has a question so far of what you heard, please raise your hand or put something in the chat box and we could unmute your mic. Or I don't see anything so far. You're letting us off the hook easy so far. Perfect. All right. Well, please raise your hand, use the chat box, ask questions. And the final theme in the curriculum is focused on generosity. And this is a day dedicated to commitments. This is the day that we start to explore the cultural and the traditional definition of generosity. This is a day that we review the vision and hope developed in interdependence, and we start to ask, what can we do to make it happen? This is where this can be done in a lot of different ways. How we have used this theme in strategic planning is in a couple different ways. We use the term popcorn out. People could just kind of yell out their commitments, their hopes, their visions. Sometimes we strategize and say, okay, out of those visions that were created on interdependence, let's put all the activities identified from the community and let's create a legend of stickers and have community members vote on what's most important. This is here where we're starting to unpack our data set and prioritize prevention efforts through voting about what their tribal citizens might think is most helpful in their healing efforts. We recognize the resources, we share appreciations for everybody in the room, but most of all, we start to honor those commitments. Now, when we first start doing GONAs, Commitments can be as easy as picking up trash on the side of the road 1 day a week, being a better student, doing my homework. When we think about youth gonas, helping my mom or dad more around the chores of the house, because young people will start to really kind of think about what's going on in their life and how can they be a better citizen or a better relative or a better son or daughter. Um, so what we see is commitments can run the gamut depending on your target population or who's in the audience. For tribal action plans, when we do GONAs around departments participating and having tribal social service based GONAs where you have departments, staff, tribal leaders, commitments might take different angles. Thinking about developing collaborative policy, understanding referral systems, working on updating a directory and thinking about what communication and collaboration would look like in a healthy system and what can each department do. So as you know, this curriculum is as flexible as using it in Western terms as organizational development, as well as in community-based terms, implementing community healing and prevention practices. But most important, it's about recognizing the resources residing within the community, mobilizing the community and empowering the community to participate and have a seat at the table in order to create the change and the hope and the direction that they want as a tribal citizen.
It's almost like getting the ground ready and plowed and turned and tilled for the seeds to be planted. If you don't do this work, this is foundational, then you're going to plant seeds in a soil that's not ready to take them.
Mm-hmm. One GONA facilitator, and every GONA facilitator is a little different. Every GONA facilitator is staying true to the fidelity of the curriculum, we hope. Yet, every GONA facilitator has a different experience and a different background. I myself, I grew up in San Francisco. I've dedicated and passionate to working with young people. I definitely have a more urban native experience. I am learning as much as I can about my culture, but that framework, comes out in my style and presentation as a GONA facilitator. So every GONA facilitator will have their kind of strengths and things that would be helpful. So I am definitely benefited around collaborating with maybe another facilitator that has more of a cultural background that helps me think and how to shape my words. So I think that that's important. But I would say this: healing is primary in strategic planning. We cannot talk to a kid about how to not break their arm again when they're in the emergency room about to get their arm reset in a cast. And I think that about our communities, our tribal nations. Our tribal nations are impacted and might have high levels of trauma or suicide or substance abuse, and to go in there and just automatically start talking about strategic planning without identifying opportunities for healing, we would make a big mistake. And so sometimes for tribal nations or tribal organizations implementing GONA, the first 2 or 3 GONAs might be community based and healing, getting that experience under your belt, using this curriculum as a tool for prevention planning. But as you become more efficient and more effective using this tool, you'll be able to expand that opportunity and really start to mobilize the community around these prevention activities. But healing is primary, and we're only going to go as fast as the slowest person in the room. And so some of the first GONAs that we see are really heavy because this might be, again, the first time community members or family members are starting to really sink their teeth in understanding what happened to us as a tribal nation.
GONA gets us prepared and ready to move forward. Another thing that when it comes to implementing change, the collaborative mindset is another way to think and get people ready to work together. Just these are not things that you have not heard before, but the 4 steps of Bruce Tuckman's 1965 thesis on forming, storming, norming, performing really do ring true. I'll turn it back over to Cipriano to walk you through these 4 steps.
Yes, Tuckman's stages group process is pretty incredible, and work on, I know we probably know it as forming, norming, and storming, but I try to say his name as much as possible just because I think he was really an innovative thinker at the time. And you, as you read these bullet points, you see, people come together because they're passionate about changing something. Growing up in San Francisco, where the we form a lot around political movements, sunrise ceremonies, tribal sovereignty, Alcatraz. There's so many different things that really kind of help us come together. But when you're intertribal and you're forming, which way do we go in the circle? Do we go clockwise or counterclockwise? The internal debate in Indian country. So we know as we come together, these are the reasons that come together. But as you click on the next slide, um, coming together might be the easy part. Uh, Coming together might be the easy part, but staying together and actually working together is where maybe some of the challenges might come up, or what he referred to as storming.
It's
And so,
tricky. It's tricky. And this is where leadership really needs to take a stand and help push it forward.
yes, yes, and both leaderships, not only tribal leadership, our elected officials have the great opportunity to grease the wheels to make this as less impact as possible, but your community leaders also have knowledge, protocols, and the respect to assist in making sure that this is not overwhelming. And so, as you could read some of these bullet points, forming might be the easy part. Storming, we know, is going to happen. And then click on the next slide. We know there will be challenges because we need everybody, but how do we do that? And so norms, in every GONA, there is a list of group norms that is developed from day one and reviewed every single day of the event, because these are our anchors. When storming happens, we need to have just an engagement process. Now, norms can be those traditional ones, but they could also be creative ones. One of my standard norms that I do whenever I'm doing community events is creative spelling is okay.
Yes.
I'm not a good speller, one, and two, there's a lot of our relatives that might be embarrassed about their writing ability, but that shouldn't negate them from participating and supporting the conversation. So have fun creating the norms, because the thing we want to do is create the safest place possible so our relatives can share. And so, we want that out of the box thinking. And sometimes our vulnerable community members that might not have formal education might be the best teachers in the room when it comes to certain challenges or obstacles that our tribe is hoping to overcome. So those norms, I believe every meeting we have in Indian country, some norms should be created, because our hope is to work together to perform.
And people want to know what's expected of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to have flexibility, but if you don't give people a job, they just tend to leave, and sometimes they don't come back to the next meeting. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really good to have those tasks and responsibilities established and agreed upon, and just have a direction. And that's where leadership comes into play. I think
And
performing is a really important part. And I made the word trust golden because I think that's the key piece in this one. Back to you, Cipriano.
yes, yes. I mean, this is our goal. Our goal is to perform. Our goal is to dream. Our goal is to do our very best. Our goal is to mobilize and create an opportunity for prevention, wellness, and healing. Because we know if we have those core foundational pieces, we have a recipe to create change in our community, no matter what we're going against, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's suicide, whether it's hopelessness, whether it's the challenges, all the different challenges that are impacting our family's healing processes. Uh, we want to help overcome, and we need everybody. We need everybody at the table. And so performing is our end goal. Yet we know that it does have some challenges to get there. But Tuckman was right, in regards to this effort. And everybody on this call probably knows this model, understands this model, and we're probably preaching to the choir here. But for our community members, or for our family members when we do these family wellness events. This is where it's really, really important that we acknowledge that, yeah, we will have some challenges. Not everybody is gonna feel um, uh, okay about the conversation, and that is okay. But we need everybody, and that's the most important piece.
Well said. Thank you for that. So those are two really important pieces to get started. So we believe that when leaders understand both that collaborative mindset that we just described, and at the same time, when the environment is rich with belonging, generosity, mastery, and interdependence, it's time to start planting those seeds of change, the goals that you have in your tap. And the tap is like we keep circling back around. You may need to adjust it as we go forward. At this point, we want to mobilize support it and support the TAP initiative, remove barriers like any kind of policies among departments that might hold people back from doing things that are in the Tribal Action Plan. Leadership may want to start to secure a place for people to meet and make it flexible in their schedules. So oftentimes it's difficult if you don't have a place to meet, that's one thing, but then there are schedules that need to be coordinated. Is this a priority in your tribe? If the TAP's a priority, then it's important to remove those barriers as far as schedules, um, so that people can have a feeling that they are allowed to meet together to talk about the TAP. It's important also as a leader on both sides to raise awareness. If the community doesn't hear about the Tribal Action Plan effort from you, who are they hearing about it from? Are they seeing signs of it on broadcast on radio stations? Are they seeing signs on schools? Are they seeing signs of it in flyers on community bulletin boards? Are people talking about it on Facebook? Really important part at this stage to start really raising awareness and not letting that go. As a matter of fact, that probably would be a really good goal written out in your tribal action plan, at least in the first year. At this stage also of implementation, it's important to maintain fidelity to a plan that you've already started, but realize that as you're starting to roll it out, the plan may need to have some course corrections. And that's perfectly okay because you're gathering more data. You can tweak it a little bit and make adjustments as you get more input. So right now our tap is just a little baby seed. It's starting to put down roots. It's starting to grow a couple of leaves. It's starting to grow. This is a good thing. At this point, we want to capture baseline data, qualitative and quantitative. Now, a lot of people know what that means. Qualitative is when we're capturing reports. Quantitative is when we're capturing numbers. Why is this important? Well, you want to know where you are so you can know where you're going. So capturing baseline data would be, for example, your community readiness assessment scores. You might want to raise those next year or in 2 years. So if you don't capture that data somehow, you won't know if you've actually made if you moved the needle forward or not. At this point, you also want to monitor, record, and report on progress that you made towards your outcomes. And this is also gathering data. You can still make adjustments at this time as needed, and then share the data with your stakeholders. Don't keep it a secret. Make it an excuse to share with them at powwows, in any opportunity that you can pull together. And you want to celebrate early successes because this is important. Get out in front of the parade and celebrate those low-hanging fruit successes. Also, form healthy partnerships. I'm going to take a deeper dive into that in just a moment. This is an important time to make sure that all the community stakeholders that you have are forming healthy partnerships, so they're working together to work smarter, not harder. Cipriano, did you have any thoughts on that? On healthy partnerships?
You know, yeah, the way that the law, the Tribal Law and Order Act, the way that the federal partners talk about the Tribal Action Plan is a living document. And I think that that should empower a tribe to say, hey, this is just a beginning. And what is our recipe for long-term prevention planning? We know that we have transitions within our tribal leadership. Some tribes have elections every year. Some tribes have elections every other year, or half the council is transitioning. Yet, I again, I have the opportunity to learn from Indian country. Chickasaw Nation has an elected official that's been in place for over 20, I want to say 24 years.
Oh, yes.
And the opportunity to see the vision of a leader evolve over time, and to nourish that vision and give that vision energy and opportunity to grow is huge. So adjustments are going to happen, and no, and nothing's perfect. As a Navajo person, I know that there is no such thing as perfect anything. And so, even if it is perfect, I would make a mistake on it just to cross it out and have a chance to do it again. But the reality is that adjustments are needed. And most of all, I think celebrating our successes is something that's still, it may be a little bit of a struggle with Indian country. And I know we know that there's a power in language, and we're starting to see tribes really look at that strength-based and resiliency language in prevention efforts. And that is going to go against the tide, or upstream to the river, because we know the federal government is deficit based. And so tribes have to believe that their direction is true. And making adjustments is a way just to say, I got your back, to your programs, to your departments, to your leaders, to your directors. Um, and so, and one thing I would add is this COVID-19 uh, challenge, or this epidemic. What tribes have done to protect their tribal citizens is vital. Every tribe has navigated COVID-19, has implemented a crisis response plan to protect their elders, their community members, and their family members. Everything should be captured in this crisis response plan, and not just focusing on the unfortunates, but also focusing in on the resiliency of our tribes through this COVID-19 is a great way to think about how have we used social media and social marketing. How have we really expanded our prevention efforts into either a virtual format or a safe distancing process, because everything your tribe has done to combat the impact of COVID-19 is a crisis response plan that should be tracked, because now you're developing the future. We know that there's probably going to be a COVID 2023. We know that just because the way our society is evolving, that this type of crisis could happen again. And so, capturing these protective efforts can be helpful for analyzing and how to strengthen these efforts next time.
Thank you. I want to take a deeper dive into healthy partnerships, because taking a healthy approach to partnering is a foundational first step during this stage, developmental stage of implementation of your TAP. When we engage in partnerships, we're making room for a new way of operating, like a mutually beneficial and respectful culture of collaboration. And this is new to some people. Some people have been doing this for just centuries, but some people have a little bit of a tricky time with it. But a supportive partnership will help all involved to weather the storms of change that may come during the implementation of a tribal action plan. And for those new to partnership, it will likely change or challenge the way you have operated in the past, which is fine. But true partnering will push us and our partners out of our comfort zone and into a new territory. With a group of partners supporting us, we can respond to crisis as a collective group, and that's a strong thing. And in healthy ways that will lead to growth and a new level of collaboration. This approach begins by considering your partner's perspectives. It may be tempting to jump into a collaboration before taking the time to understand a partner's situation, their motivations, their culture or priorities, or even their goals. They may not even know much about the tribal action plan. We may not know the specific goals of their grants either, or their program, their organizational structure, and very likely they don't know a whole lot about where we're going with this tribal action plan either. So taking a proactive role in getting to know a potential partner and helping them understand the whole process will help strengthen alignment of purpose and avoid misunderstandings and conflicts. So things to think about when getting involved with a partner in the community is, do you know what their vision statement is and where they're going? Do you know their relevant goals and how they apply to the tribal action plan? What can you find out about their reputation and reach within the community? What's in it for them if they work with you as a partner? Do you both agree with the purpose for the partnership? And how do you assess the added value that their partnership brings to the tribal action plan work that you're doing? What makes it a healthy partnership is that the partners are communicating and respecting each other's time and effort. If this is good, then partners come together and they can implement a short-term goal, such as a shared event or a partnership that may last over several months or years. Formal partners will usually sign an MOU or an MOA and have regular standing meetings to address mutual vision, goals, and outcomes. Or if you have an informal partnership, you might just work on a single one-time event annually, and that's okay. So how can we strengthen a partnership? There are some tips. We consider ways to offer support to a partner and strengthen your relationship is that you can find space and time to simply listen to them talk about their program or operation. Share what you know about the mutual population you both serve, focusing on the effects of historical trauma, lateral violence, or something else. You can ask for time to discuss what you both know about being trauma informed. But what else can you do? So I'm going to open it up to the audience, Cipriano, to see if they have anything that they'd like to share. I don't know if we have any brave souls that can take a healthy risk. So we're kind of taking a deeper dive. We've talked about GONA, we've talked about collaborative mindset, we've talked about strengthening partnerships. These are all really significant tools that you need to implement a tribal action plan, which is a big deal. We have anybody who wants to take a healthy risk and reach out. Well, we'll keep the lines open.
Definitely. Chat box or raise your hands. And if anybody is familiar with the SAMHSA funding stream system of care, or if your tribe has had a circle of care grant, you know the importance of dreaming and developing a roadmap for behavioral health services or healing services or prevention services. If your tribe or tribal organization has had a system of care, you understand the importance of grassroots efforts as well as integrated clinical support, collaborative partners. No one program can do it all. So that system of care has values, principles, and definitions of why and how a collaboration can be successful and who is the focus audience. Wraparound models are nothing new to Indian country. The term might be new, but we have had collective support within our tribal nations from time immemorial, even whether it's our extended families, whether it's the role of our aunties, uncles, whether it's the clan system, or band system, or collaboration amongst tribes in a region. We know the importance of that partnership and collaboration. We wouldn't be here if we didn't collaborate even with the buffalo or the elk or the deer or the salmon or the water, or our rocks. When you think about our tradition and our cultural modality, sweat lodge, the integration of rock, water, heat, and our songs and our prayers. So collaboration is not just thinking about that program next door for us as in Indian country. Collaboration is really working with our cultural leaders, our traditional knowledge, our relatives. And when I say relatives, that might be the four-legged, the winged, our trees and our environment, our water systems. And so, that's the opportunity of a tribe mobilizing its community, is how do we define community? And how do we start to engage those different parts of our community to really think about what wellness and healing can mean?
Thank you. So as we go down through the time with our tribal action plan, and it's growing stronger, the roots are going deeper, the leaves are getting bigger, it's time to remember to, and if we haven't done it already, it's time to really make sure that you weave in, wherever possible, culture and language. This is where we can tweak the goals and objectives and activities and make sure you can reach out to the people who may not have been involved earlier and get them involved and weave that culture and language in as much as possible. And at this early stage as well, we've seen success, we've seen some tribes successfully use their tribal action plan to go after grants. This is a good time to start planting those seeds for next year. Get that money flowing that would help support the goals and the vision and the activities that you already have in your tribal action plan. So use it to go after agriculture goals, agriculture grants, education, Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, all of the different federal grants that come down from Washington, D.C. Use that one tap to go after all of those grants. Also, form a crisis response team because the holidays are just around the corner and there's always a little trouble spot there. And they say that April, also in the spring, is a really hard time for people who are going through a crisis. And COVID hasn't left us yet, so there's still a crisis in the air. So this is an important time to take an effort to form that crisis response team. I'm going to take a little bit of a deep dive into that right now. The troubled waters. So the objectives of forming a crisis response team is that they would support and debrief those affected by suicidal ideation, a threat or attempt or death, and also people who are deeply involved in substance misuse. Also, they would reduce the possibility of other suicidal crises by increasing prevention, education, referral for intervention, and postvention activities. There are a lot of activities that are needed to form and implement a suicide crisis response for a team. And then this will vary depending on where you are and the conditions that are specific to your community and the people that you have. The following is a list of steps that will be necessary for most teams. You can follow this step by step or make adjustments as needed. I don't know if you've seen this before, Cipriano, have you?
Yes, thank you.
I'm not going to read this all, but it's a nice list, and this list is available to everybody. But it really gets back to recruiting key stakeholders to get involved, including first responders, law enforcement, EMTs, schools, mental health workers, and community members at large. Get them to buy in, contact them, get them to buy in from the community, including tribal leaders, formalize a team membership, get a volunteer application form together, develop standard operating procedures, develop the crisis response protocol and follow-up forms, a flow chart so everybody knows what's going on, develop a suicide surveillance instrument to track information and data, train, and conduct a crisis mock drill. That's a lot. So you need a whole community team to help you with that. Here's a list of volunteer process. I'm not going to read that, but I will leave it up on the screen for a second. There's a lot going on here. So, I mean, but this is a real important part because this gets to what a tribal action plan is really all about, to address alcohol and substance misuse and suicide. So it's really important to have these pieces as a star within your tab.
Well, and I would say this too is, one of the big challenges that we know is that impacts Indian country is workforce. And a lot of times when we get connected to tribes to support a strategic plan, the challenge is we're stretching a workforce, a thin workforce, even thinner. And so, that's why we really try to strategize on recipes and processes that look at ways to engage the community that are built on their knowledge base, and traditions and cultures and Gona events can be done low tech, low cost. It could be built on community knowledge. Yet what we have seen is that the more Gonas a community has, there's more higher rates of volunteerism to support those wellness activities. So any tribe who's going to be engaging in the development of a strategic plan, the opportunity of creating a seat at the table for your community members to be generous to help your collective efforts is going to be vital. And that might be one of the easiest ways to get a workforce that is not going to leave when the grant ends, that's not going to leave when the project sunsets. And so, how are we mobilizing our communities and supporting our community members to rise up and assist with those prevention and wellness efforts when we know they are already, whether it's lighting the fire to raise awareness, whether it's participating in community or social events, whether it's volunteering to cook food or to help seat people at the table. Those are all match funding. Those are all opportunities that a grant could say that they're expanding the workforce and creating opportunities for prevention efforts, as well as support the tribe in a process that they're getting healthy volunteers to contribute to these activities. So that translation piece that each of your programs have to support workforce development through, engaging healthy community members to contribute can be a vital piece of success through an action plan.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you for sticking with us. I think we'll end with an interesting story about a crisis response that was developed during one of our trainings. We had an interesting experience with a team that the tribe brought together that were sort of split down the middle of 50% of the group was sort of an administrator type professional, and the other part were people in recovery or practitioners. And they sort of split down the middle, and the administrators were really trying to write the tribal action plan, to write it in full sentences. And the other group were just very frustrated, and they wanted to draw what they were thinking. And so we gave them the whiteboard, and they took off. And I think they did this in half an hour, Cipriano? They just drew out a crisis response based on their own experiences. And I'm going to turn it over to you to sort of describe the process. It's really wonderful. We call it the P-pod model. Looks like steps to me, but it's a really nice model. It's a little P-pod here.
Yes, we had 3.5 days to sit with a tribe and work with anybody that they invited to the meeting. And this tribe invited community members, they invited people in early recovery, they invited tribal leaders. So we had a well-rounded group. And Sarah, I think you're saying it in a very strength-based way, but with this group for 2 days, they just butted heads. And they butted heads because they were all looking at the same problem through different lenses.
Yes, there was a lot of teeth gnashing and hand wringing.
And I want to say thank you to Simone, who wrote a comment in the box about the importance of debriefing as a team, the importance of debriefing daily to reflect on what we just learned, what we observed, what we witnessed, and how do we strategize. And I think when we think about strategic planning, it's even for us as a TA center, we might go in with the best intentions, the best agenda, yet depending on the readiness of the community, the readiness of the opportunity, it doesn't go well. And for this event, we banged heads for 2 days. There was a small motivated group that were going to write the action plan out for the whole community. And there was a large part of the community in attendance that felt that that small population truly didn't understand the impact of what they were trying to embark on. And so for 2 days, this conversation about the impact of substance abuse and the challenges giving treatment were just front and center. So we head huddled and we debriefed, just like Simone said is a best practice. And in the head huddle, we just said, you know what? There's so much knowledge in the room that we as facilitators might be slowing it down. And so we decided to turn the groups separate to work on what they are most passionate about. And the people, our relatives that were with this tribe in early recovery, we turned around the whiteboard and said, here is a whiteboard. Here's a dry erase marker. Nothing's permanent. Here's the eraser, and here you go. Please help us. Please help us understand the stumbling areas that you all have navigated to find balance. And they came up with this in about 2 hours. and they named it, and it's color coded, and it's step by step. And so as you could see here, those black triangles are the danger areas. And they talked about when relatives hit rock bottom, the ugliness of rock bottom, whether that ugliness, and you could see in the black pen, is where the challenges or the opportunities could be. So the rock bottom is the court system, being arrested, losing your kids, those challenging moments. And so they said that that's when the person hits rock bottom and they start to realize that they need help. And they know that they have to get in detox. Yet we all know on this call that when you call a detox center, your wait time is days, maybe weeks for some of our tribes. And that's when the person is ready. And that challenge. So when you phone call, and you could see here in that first triangle, the phone call to someone you know for help, there's opportunities that the community can do, and there's challenges that the community will have to deal with. Some of the things that they talked about was like when they called a friend for help, people went over their house and waited with that person. They might have had to lock them in the bathroom. And I know that for the professional field, that might be shunned upon, but as a caring, loving, tribal citizen, family member, locking them in the bathroom might be the best idea you come up with in that situation. But they talked about that. They talked about those challenges. So they talked about rock bottom and then getting into detox. And then once you're in the detox, you're at that second step of trying to get into treatment, which is another huge waiting piece. And while you're in detox, you're also navigating these systems. Your child might be within the Indian child welfare system now, in the court system, child protective services. You're having spiritual challenges. You need personal advocacy. You need spiritual help. Uh, and another thing they talked about was the challenges with family. And as you could see here, families at every level, because they talked about when somebody's in substance abuse or these challenges, they probably burned every single bridge they had. So family healing is needed, but what does that even look like in these different stages? So as they get into treatment, you could see as they get into treatment, the things that are helpful in treatment are those talking circles, those men's and women's group, coming together and just breaking bread with each other, counseling services, groups and meetings. They're still going through the child court system, or could be a criminal court system. They know they're starting to practice ceremonies. They're starting to practice sweat lodge. They understand spirituality, and they're starting to get introduced to vocational rehab. Yet family is there. They know that family healing. And that was a very important piece when they started talking about this, was that re-entry as a sober person or in sobriety, that re-entry back into the community, back into their family, because again, they probably burnt a lot of bridges. And so as you could see here, that treatment, the return to home, the things that were supportive as they returned to home, they identified craft, beadwork, artwork, hunting, snaring, feast, participating in the community, being part of the community, contributing to the community, and also thinking about contributing to their life, which is that vocational rehab. So there was that emotional, that spiritual, and that economical piece of contribution and finding a way before they got to Mina. And I'm probably going to butcher this, and I apologize. I believe
Been a dizzy one.
awesome, Sarah. That was right off the cuff. Uh, but as you could see here on the side of the Peapod model was things that they felt were vital for tribal leaders and programs to hear. Revise policies to strengthen our service mentality around helping our relatives. Knowledge and access of services available to community members. They talked about the lack of a directory, and even in the directory, the phone numbers were not even working anymore for some of the programs. They talked about, engaging all partners that could assist: TANF programs, health insurances, benefits, childcare, food share, that out of the box thinking, that proactive thinking when you think about collaborative mindset and who those partners are all. But most of all, they talked about addiction and recovery for all community members, education and training about addiction and recovery. Don't just focus on the abuser, but raise awareness across the whole community about the reality, to break that stigma, and really all those conversations, and it should be based on that Ojibwe way of thinking. And then, as you can see here, the final comment I'll say here is that when somebody navigates this model, they are going to be the workforce that gives back to the share. And so when finally somebody reaches that good mind, and they're balanced, and they're navigating their sobriety, they're the ones that give back, and they're supporting those spiritual interventions and contributing to those rock bottom challenges that our relatives might face. And so that giving back piece is there. So this model was created in 2 hours. And this is the power of having community members who are navigating these systems contribute to strategic planning initiatives. And this could be done, we used a GONA model to do this. This wasn't a true GONA as far as the fidelity of the curriculum, but we used a lot of guided activities that are within the GONA model to build the container of trust, to talk about what happened to us as a people and what are the challenges that we're facing. And if it wasn't for the trust and the belonging and the real conversations and honesty, we wouldn't have got to an opportunity where these relatives felt the power to share. And so, it wasn't a true GONA model, but it's built on those foundations and belief.
It was what we could do with the time that we had to do it.
Mhm. And
Which
I
is,
see a question in here. Um, Thank you for the comments. And I see Simone, thank you. And I'll just read her comment. Yes, sorry, my mouse is a little sensitive. Yes, as you mentioned, we can plan. However, conversations can be rich. There can be a million and one things that happen. It is a necessity to debrief and sort out feelings, thoughts. Yes, and what I realize is the challenge
absolutely.
with the English language, depending on our generation and our experiences, words mean different. And I always think of the word respect. What does respect look like for a teenager, and is it the same as my view in my 40s? So true, and why those debriefs and those head huddles and just making sure that we're all on the same page are vital.
I
Question.
think it's important to just mention also that there were tears and quite a lot of frustration and internal anger right
Mhm.
before this came to pass, this design. So that's one thing we don't really talk about very much in the tribal action planning because it's not very popular to talk about. But be
Mhm.
prepared. I mean, this is you need to include people who are in recovery and practitioners because they're going to keep it real.
Yes, yes,
We
yes.
may want to go off on write a beautiful tribal action plan that's very logical and it would appear to work for everybody. But if we don't include the voices of people who are really going through it, we're missing the boat.
Yes,
And
yes.
but it's not easy when you let them in. You have to put the armor on, maybe throw a piece of meat in there, but it gets a little testy. But it's worth every moment because you're going to get the real answers to work to help real people in the community.
Mhm. We have a question, and thank you, Julie, for submitting the question. How does the word peapod apply to the drawn model?
Oh,
I would love to romanticize about Indian country and come up with a really cool perspective and say, oh, it was this. But the reality is somebody said it looks like a peapod, and everybody agreed, and that name stuck. Like
I
those
think
good
it's this.
nicknames.
If you look at this is the big pea pod right here, and these things are loosely the peas in the pod. Does that help?
Yeah, the name just stuck, as we were just kind of wrestling what to name this. And I think that they didn't want to name it a crisis response plan. And
Yeah.
I think that they were looking, and just they named it on what they felt it looked like. So I don't want to romanticize and be like, oh, it was this and this. It was just something that kind of jumped in and somebody blurted it out and it stuck. Thank you for the questions, and please send any questions or comments. But just it was just an awesome opportunity to really let those community members shine, and it really opened the eyes of the importance of those tribal leaders, because they were ready to write. They had their paragraphs, they were ready to write, and you know, it was the community that said, hey, slow down,
And
you
they
guys
weren't
don't
happy.
even comprehend the problem.
Yeah, they weren't happy to slow down. They wanted to move forward, and we just had to kind of really ask them to please, you know, stand by and wait for the other voices to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I think, it's very hard. I mean, because when people are very, very emotional, it can really impact the meeting, and this one did. But
Mm-hmm.
it was what we needed at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
so I even though there were high emotions, I'm glad it happened, and I think it will continue to happen.
Yes, and thank you, Anthony, for the comment. Excellent plan. You know, and as a former clinician, I had to remind myself, don't be afraid of tears.
Yes.
Let the community write, let the community dream, let the community identify those gaps in services, and we couldn't have done it without them being honest and true to what's going on.
It's almost like the comment we use a lot: be willing to stand in the fire with people, because this can be a very emotional topic. So ending on a high note, we'll just leave you with some thoughts that this whole TAP effort does take time. It's really important to keep the awareness campaign going, add people to the team, bring them on board, and enjoy the journey. This really is about the journey. If you're Ho Chunk, it's the Ho Chunk journey. If you're Saginaw Chippewa, it's the Saginaw Chippewa journey. If you're Hopi, it's the Hopi journey. Chickasaw, it's the Chickasaw journey. Every journey is a little bit different. We try to offer what we've learned being out in the field, and some similarities do exist, but everything's going to be your journey.
And thank you, Bobby. I think you really hit it on the nail on the head. It's that's the opportunity we have as a TA center to engage tribes and hopefully learn from those different eyes and synthesize the information. And as we support tribes in developing strategic plans, uh, you know, the more eyes, the more lenses, the more experiences are helpful. But how do we have those collective conversations? And how do we not get stuck on the trauma of the experiences, and how do we get the solutions? The Gona model is there's no better model that guides the community through activities to get to those preventions, to that generosity and those commitments.
So as we start to close out, try to meet us next month, September 1st. We'll release the module 4 as part of our Tribal Action Plan learning series, where we'll talk about reflecting, assessing, and revising your Tribal Action Plan. Any closing words, Cipriano?
I just want to say thank you guys, everybody on the call who took time out of their important day and your important work. Really appreciate everything everybody does in contributing to Indian country. And thank you to our team who, you know, I see some of our team members on the call. You know, this is heart work that we get to do, and it is hard at times. But the opportunity to learn from your tribes, to learn from your communities and support that wellness work is so important. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.